VERSEWORLD, Verse token, going to the moon, they said. We said it was going to zero, and guess who was right? Today, we're going over how we spotted another rug pull before it happened, and why the warning signs were screaming at it via our tokenized tracker. Welcome back to Tokenomics Decoded. I'm Pete. With me is Dan, CEO of Tokenise. Dan, we've got another told you so moment. Would you mind sharing a little bit on what we're going to be going through today?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It was a bit of a told you so moment, but it's also quite disappointing and sad to see. One of the biggest things that we've been thinking about for a long time now is how we can help to keep value in the markets. And we initially approached this thesis by creating our build tool, which is in theory able to help to create much better and far superior tokenomics than you usually would be able to. But not everyone wants to use it just yet, which is cool. We're still sort of like on our grind from that perspective. And so we decided to build out something that more closely tracks the health of an asset once it's already gone to market. And this way we can look in retrospect at the health of the asset and help us prove that how we're thinking about the health of tokens is correct. And so far, our tracker has been doing that.
Just for anyone new here, we're from Tokenise. We build tools that analyzes tokenomics, help spot disasters before they happen, and ultimately build robust and sustainable and profitable tokenomic models to, like Dan said, keep value in the market. Sometimes we're early, sometimes we're wrong, but this time we've got the receipts, and we'll just throw that right here. So this was posted on LinkedIn and X days ago. The token's down something like I think 90% since then, and this was a big project.
Yeah.
But without further ado, let's dissect this and figure out what killed it.
So, as far as we can tell, and this is, I'm going to preface this with this particular asset that we're looking at is what we would define as a bit of a pump and dumper. I believe we're pulling data from Pump Fund. So I'm certain that this is an asset that was actually released through Pump Fund system.
Yeah,
Most of the time, unfortunately, usually like, 95 times, 98 times out of 100, an asset on Pump Fund will almost always dump to zero very, very quickly. So even though, our tracker here we can see just from certain metrics, which we'll go into in a second, just based on these certain metrics, we can see it's gone to zero or very close to zero. But most of the time when it comes to pump fund assets, because they're not backed by proper tokenomics, they're almost always going to zero anyway, which is a bit depressing to think about, really. And so in this particular instance, our thesis was quite straightforward. The velocity score for VERSEWORLD was incredibly high. I can't remember exactly how much it was on the day, but even right now it's at 21%. A typically healthy velocity score is somewhere around 2 to 5%. So you can see that.
sorry, Dan, hold up. Can you explain velocity score like I'm someone who just downloaded Coinbase yesterday?
Sure, yeah.
What is a velocity score and why should I care?
So velocity scores essentially indicate how often an asset is changing hands. So how many times am I, cycling this asset through? How many times am I trading it? And the reason why this is a health metric that we look at is because when you're thinking about a healthy token, you're thinking about long-term holders and long-term sustainability and long-term interest in the asset. And so if your velocity score is really low, it means that people are holding your assets long-term. And it means they're holding it for longer and longer periods of time. So in this instance, with Bitcoin, for example, I believe their velocity score, I think Bitcoin's velocity score hovers somewhere between 2 to 3% on any day. So that says to us that people are holding Bitcoin long-term and they've been holding it long-term for a while. Whereas with this asset, VERSEWORLD, I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it might have been somewhere around 150% on the day. Even right now, the velocity score is sitting at around 22%. You can see that's hugely inflated. And what it means to us and what it says to us is that people are constantly swapping this asset. And oftentimes this means they're also constantly selling the asset, which is never a good sign.
Right. Okay. So when you saw this velocity score, what was immediately going through your head?
At the time when I saw it, I was thinking almost certainly that this is about to start to head towards zero. We have certain markers that we look for when thinking about buy versus sell volume. I think at the time this was particularly high in sell volume. I apologize. It's like, this would have been about a week ago now that we sort of realized that this was happening. But yeah, at the time, volume would have been high from a sell pressure perspective. Sorry, sell volume would have been high, which relates to high sell pressure, which relates to, not a good thing for a token.
Got it. Got it. And this ultimately ended badly for Verse Token. But can we talk a little bit about this description and this prediction? Because we didn't just say it looks sketchy. We actually said it's totally cooked. Can you add some more details on what led the analysis to totally cooked?
Yeah, of course. So the velocity score was one part. Then there was also stability score. So stability score was a huge problem. I believe at the time it was sitting at 0.3. I think, yeah, I've got the screenshot in front of me. It was sitting at 0.3. So a 0.3 out of 10 stability score is horrible. Stability score indicates the volatility of an asset. So the lower the stability, the higher the volatility. So if your asset is sitting at a 0.3 stability score, which means it's almost like a 97 on a velocity score, on a volatility score, this is a problem. Volatility can be good in markets when thinking about trading. And in this particular instance, if you were trading in the short position, you'd be having a great time. But if you're buying and you're a holder and you're trying to be a long-term supporter of the project, you're going to get dumped on. So we saw very low stability, high velocity, and then we also saw an inflation rate spike. So I think, put the screenshot up from LinkedIn so that you can see the date card. But we saw a big spike in inflation. It was something like 100% spike. And this is quite a big concern. It usually means that a huge amount of supply has entered the market very, very quickly. Right now, we can see that the circulating supply is 100 million and the non-circulating supply is 900 million. What I would imagine would have happened is that 100 million would have hit the market, within a couple of minutes. And VerseWorld would not have had enough liquidity in their pools to sort of shoulder against this particular increase in supply. So I think one thing to note is that it's not always, if you look at one particular metric, that would form a short thesis. If you were only looking at inflation as an example, not every time, not 100 times out of 100, would a high inflation rate kill your token. Because if there is high inflation, but lots of buyers, lots of supporters of the token, or there's a lot of liquidity sitting in a pool, it's less of a problem. But in this instance, we had a huge amount of supply hit very quickly and very minimal liquidity sitting in pools to shoulder against that supply. We had high velocity, which indicated sell pressure. We had low stability, which indicated high volatility. And these three particular metrics correlating with each other indicated to us that this asset was about to short.
Okay, got you. And so for people who are holding the Verse token involved in the project, is there somewhere that it could have gone, or how could they have been watching for these kinds of signs before it happened?
So on our tracker, actually, you can see the velocity score creeping up. So velocity is a dynamic value. So it's sort of shifting.
It changes and shifts. It's not
It
static.
changes and shifts.
Yeah.
Correct. So say, for example, you were sitting at the Tokenise tracker and you were watching velocity score. As you saw it creeping up, that would become a leading indicator for what is about to follow, in my mind. Because especially with these inflation rates tend to hit. They're sort of like massive spikes in a very short period of time. Now, by the time the inflation score sort of hits, in my mind, I would have sort of already been out of that token, or I would be out of that token much, much quicker. As soon as the inflation score hits, I'd be straight out of the token, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I would be sort of watching velocity as it's creeping up. And then stability, of course, is more like a 24-hour time frame. So stability is less dynamic. Velocity would be that one that you could, sort of watch, if that makes sense.
Got you. I want to touch on another point about communication and how teams and supporters talk about this stuff in the public light. I mean, we can imagine everyone's like telling everyone diamond hands, trust the process, right up until the end, right? And we can just have a look at the Verse token performance now, and it's bottomed out. It's all the way at the bottom. It's not doing anything. Can you talk a little bit about like kind of team communication versus reality in the markets when this stuff actually launches, and how not everything that you see on X is actually reality, let alone Telegram?
Well, I think what's interesting about that is diamond hands is probably... It's actually, you know what? It's totally ironic. So diamonds are neither rare nor valuable. It was just a marketing campaign that made diamonds super valuable. It was a marketing campaign to drive wedding and engagement rings. And the idea was that your love lasts forever, and so does a diamond. In this particular instance, with diamond hands, 99% of the time, that is just a marketing stint. It's just a word to keep retail in a token while the insiders dump on them, make big profits, and leave.
Got you. I think by this stage in our experience in the market, we know that these hands are not diamonds.
No, most of the time they're saying diamond hands and they are papery as hell. They're trying to
Yeah.
do it as quickly as they possibly can.
For projects who are either in market already and they're still building, or projects who are looking to build or launch in market, do you think this kind of mentality is relatively toxic? Like, how it seems to be general consensus now that it's like, yep, we're just holding this, we're going to go to the moon. But how good or bad is that for actual project building?
Well, I think it's herd mentality.
Mm.
Right. If my friend's in this and his friend's in this and her friend's in this and our friend's in this and their friend's in this, then we're all in this together. And if it's a sinking ship, then we're all sinking together. And I don't actually think that's the right way to approach it. We are much more interested in data-backed approaches. And if data is saying to me that the asset you're about to either buy into is going to die, or if the assets you've already bought into it's about to die, then I see no reason to cling on to her mentality. If the data is screaming at me, you need to leave this asset. So
Yeah.
I think that, and because of how strongly herd mentality sort of permeates, it starts to get a bit cultish. And in that instance, yes, it would be. I would define that as quite toxic, actually, because now you don't have independent critical thinking. You just have, if we all stick in this together, we might be millionaires. Money might go up. Unfortunately, in all instances, someone is going to be left caught holding the bag.
Always. It always happens.
Always.
Always happens.
Always.
So from a founder perspective, and let's just look at it from a tokenomic and kind of modeling perspective instead of their marketing approach, what could they have, or what should they have done differently? Let's give some constructive criticism, and like how, using proper robust tokenomics and actual planning and modeling, can you walk me through what could have been done?
Well, I think with First, for example, so 10% of your token supply entering into market on day one should not necessarily be a killer. It shouldn't be the be all and end all. It's not a huge amount of supply entering, like 10%, 10% relative to the rest of your token supply. It's not a huge amount. And so just doing basic fundamentals correct could have solved this problem. My immediate thinking is liquidity. If Verse had treated liquidity as more of a priority, then this may not have happened. So you imagine you had 10% of your supply entering into market on day one, and then you had a 10% of your supply sitting as liquidity. You've now got quite a good cushion there, sitting against any potential supply shocks or any sell pressure that comes into your asset. So I think fundamentally speaking, liquidity is really important. And within our build tool on Tokenize, we have a specific mechanic that looks at your liquidity at TGE. And so at least a 1-to-1 ratio is good, but anything higher than that is better. So say, for example, you had like 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 liquidity to supply at TGE. Those are all really good metrics. So that's my immediate thinking would have sort of helped without really knowing exactly what their approach was to tokenomics. I wouldn't be able to give too much insight, but that's just off the cuff thinking about how I would approach this.
Are these the kind of repeating patterns you're seeing repeating across most projects that fail?
Yeah. Well, see, I think there's failure, and then there's like failure to launch in some sense. So there are some projects out there, like Ohm, for example, that straight up failed. They were artificially inflating price. They had very artificially thin liquidity, and then when too much sell pressure hit, the token just sort of was eroded. In this instance with Verse, I think it was more a subject of failure to launch. They didn't quite get their tokenomics correct, and so fell flat right when they should have been soaring up and to the right.
Got you. Is there a bit of a playbook here that you're seeing? Like, could you spot the next one coming?
This is an interesting one. Now, for transparency, actually, we're about to start getting into some quite heavy back testing. We have a few metrics that we want to start testing that are not inflation or stability or velocity. There's other stuff we've been thinking about for a little while. And these particular metrics we're going to start to look at from a historic graphing perspective. And I think if we can start to define better some of these mechanics that we know for sure will impact the token, and then of course what their correlation value is, because if you have something that's at 70% probability and something else that's at 70% probability, and they happen at the same time, I believe it's like 70% of the 30%. So you end up with higher correlation if more events happen simultaneously, if that makes sense. And the more we can test this and the more data focused it is, the better we can get at predicting what will happen next, and the safer we can help to make founders after they've launched.
Got it. Speaking of, failed launches and a lot of stuff coming up, are there any other projects giving you similar vibes without being too specific?
The other day, don't know if it's even on here anymore, but we actually noticed, polyhedra network.
Say it again, sorry.
Polyhedra network.
Okay.
It's already happened, unfortunately. If we look at their scores, so they're scoring a 258% on velocity. This is obviously very, very bad. They have a 0.1% stability score. 0.1 out of 10 stability score. And they went from $2 to 40 cents in the space of a couple of minutes. Now, we actually saw a huge inflation rate as a result of this. Like we had about an 8% inflation spike just prior to this price dump. And if we actually look back, I think it's 2 months or something like that. Yeah. So back in mid-May, we saw a 350% spike in inflation, which was directly a month preceding the token dump. And more research is needed, more testing is needed. We're not saying that we have exactly hit this one on the head just yet, but potentially what the data is suggesting in this particular instance is that we potentially saw Polyhedra's token dump coming about a month before it happened.
Wow. So what specific indicators are we looking at now? And for your user who's wanting to come and do a little bit more research, where would you first point them?
So for this particular asset, we saw a 350% spike in their inflation rate.
Which is how many tokens are entering the market?
Yeah. So what at the time, how many tokens entered the market relative to how many tokens were already in the market? If that makes sense. So if you have 10 tokens and then all of a sudden you go to 50 tokens, your inflation rate has gone up about 400% basically. So in this instance, we saw a very high inflation rate very quickly, about a month preceding the dump. And then if we go to zoom in a little bit closer, so on the day of the dump, we saw another 8% inflation spike, which is not huge, especially not considering, relative to 350%. But we have to remind ourselves that typical inflation rate is 3 to 8% per year, not 3 to 8% in 2 minutes. So that's a big, big difference. And then, of course, Polyhedra stability score is in the toilet, and their velocity score is hugely inflated. Like, 250% is a dangerous velocity score.
Which is telling us that a lot of people are selling. And they're changing hands a lot.
That is the inference, correct. Yes, that's the inference. So all of these things, and again, I want to be very clear about this. We're not exactly saying that we have a crystal ball that we can see into the future a month ahead just yet. And we do need to do more testing, and we do need to make sure that our data is correct. But what we're seeing here is that potentially we potentially saw this crash coming about a month ahead.
If someone's listening and they think their bag might be the next VERSEWORLD or Polyhedra, what could be a 30-second health check they could do?
Well, I wish I could say use our tracker, but it's not live just yet. It's almost there. It's almost there. It's so close. We're just doing some last minute tests, like I said. So in a couple months' time, in the near future, you'll be able to use our tracker, and you'll be able to use the metrics that we use for predicting these crashes. If I was somebody else right now, I would be doing much more critical thinking. I'd be less herd mentality. I'd be looking at the data, and I'd just be very wary of these assets and how they're sort of traveling. If you're in a position where you're looking at something and you can see, because you can look at sell and buy volume on a lot of different exchanges and a lot of different like data tracking software. I'm fairly sure even CoinGecko have sort of metrics around this. If you're seeing much more significant sell volume all of a sudden compared to buy volume, that would be an immediate indicator to me that I need to start taking a closer look at what's going on with this asset.
Got it. So there you have it. VerseWorld, another classic case study on why tokenomics actually matter. Dan, if we were to walk away from this one with a key lesson for listeners, what would it be?
Do your own research and always critically think. Don't avoid the herd mentality. Don't give in to the herd mentality. We don't need more sheep.
For anyone wanting to avoid the next VerseWorld casualty, we've built Tokenise Tracker, and an upcoming, I won't drop her name, but it's a very, very helpful and very, very skilled AI assistant. We're going to spot these patterns exactly when and before they blow up your portfolio. So you can check that all out at Tokenise.tech. Next week, we're doing another live breakdown. If you've got a project you want us to analyze, hit us up on X. Until then, may your bags pump and may your tokenomics actually make sense. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.